Isaac Newton, Albert Einstein, Thomas Jefferson, they're all introverted, just like you, and they've all changed the world.
One of the things I've learned is everything is a learnable skill. We just have to believe we can, learn a system for it, and then put actual effort into making sure that we learn it.
5 multi-million-dollar businesses, different industries.
I was making great money. I was living in that apartment I was telling you about with the 3 cars, all that sort of thing. Absolutely not happy. Miserable would have been a better word. For me, money and awards are all about making a more significant impact to help more people get what I love to see, get away from what I hate to see, and allow me to make the mission that I see as meaningful. I actually think we are our own best assets or our own worst enemies. You want to make money authentically. You want to make money doing something that's meaningful. Well, if in that case, it's not just about the money, is it? So you want to make this amount of money or this many sales to help people with this mission to get them to a successful outcome because you want to serve.
It takes me on average between 8 to 10 hours to prepare for my next guest. And I have this method where I need to see the person that I will talk in front of me, and I need to sense the energy to visualize the leitmotif of an actual interview. In case with Matthew Pollard, I'll be honest with you, I was kind of concerned because I stuck there for a moment and I wasn't sure whether I could find questions that Matthew will be excited about because of how many great interviews he gave with so much passion and energy. But then I found what I was looking for, that I was happy about, and eventually it got Matthew excited as well. Now you can watch my conversation with Matthew Pollard and maybe it can get you excited as well. Thank you and enjoy the episode. I want to start off with a broad question, but I wanted to, then it's going to help me to learn a lot about you. All right. So, I assume a lot of who you are came from the young age of you growing up, right? Can you paint for me who Matthew was at the age of between 10 to 15?
Shy, uncomfortable in my own space. I mean, I had a reading speed of a 6th grader in late high school. So super introverted, always felt like the slow kid, and really just hadn't found my own place in the world at that point. It was only when I was in very late high school, I got diagnosed with this thing called Irlen syndrome, which basically means I put on a funny pair of colored lenses and miraculously I can learn to read. Mm-hmm. And while it helped with the reading, it didn't allow me to read like everyone else. I could start the process of learning to read. The biggest hurdle for me was that, the having funny colored lenses definitely didn't help with my confidence, but I'd been beaten down. I felt like I was the slow kid for so many years. It takes a lot to unwind that. I think one of my favorite sayings is that the seeds, at the adversities we face, seeds the success of our future. And I really believe that, because for me, I think if it wasn't for that adversity, I wouldn't have learned. And I think what I took from it is positive, that there is always a solution to any problem. Sometimes it's not the obvious one. So for me, when I got into sales, I didn't have gift of gab. For the reading, it was the glasses. But that's, I think, the origin point of that. It was a lot of times problems seem insurmountable, and then the solution to the problem seems so obvious once you figure it out.
While I learned about your story and learn about the disorder, right, that you were diagnosed with, and then now you tell me this, I think you also, have you been like a dreamer? Have you been like observing people and dreaming and like on your thoughts and etc.? Have you been that type of a boy growing up?
Yeah, I've always wondered what was possible. Actually, there's a story that didn't make it to my book. There's actually a chapter that we never released. It's part of the bonus material actually for when people buy the book. But there's a story in there about how when I was younger, I wanted a computer. I couldn't afford a computer, and my brain seems to figure out ways of doing things, right? So I didn't have a computer. I wanted a computer. So I was too young to get a job. But what I realized is I found out there was such differences in computer part prices. Mm-hmm. So I'd call the ones that were the most expensive, and I would ask them to match the lower price. And they'd be like, we can't even buy it for that. So I actually worked with a couple of groups to grab the cheaper prices, and deliver them to the ones that were the expensive prices. And then I actually managed to develop some wholesale relationships, introduce those, and the deal was they'd just give me half the profits. Oh, nice. And they honored that deal, which, I had no contract. I was a kid, right? But I think they they just, they honor the deal. I was ecstatic about that. And I actually got a computer in like 6 months by just doing that. And I didn't actually do anything. I was making, decent money, and I wasn't doing anything. So, for my high school project, I could, everybody else invested $50 and I didn't invest the money at all. I did it for free, but the business that I made at school actually made more money than most of the teachers made that week for something I really didn't put much effort into. So I've always been able to see opportunities because I haven't defined my life by what everybody else is doing. And I think that's a lot of us are following other people and what other people do. I actually don't enjoy doing that, and I've never focused on going down that path. For me, what I've always decided to do is say, what am I really excited about? What am I really passionate about? What am I really interested in? And then that inquisitiveness to say, what if it was different, or what if it was done differently? And I think that a lot of times when you're young, you get told to switch that part of your brain off. I never really did. And I think that that's a superpower, really.
Do you think that ability of, thinking outside the box and looking into yourself and thinking who you are was because you were, feeling like a kind of outsider growing up, not different, not being like the others kids?
How would I put it? I think anyone that in later life ends up very successful or very unsuccessful would fit that category, right? I feel that most people, if you fit in the spectrum of normal, you tend to do what normal people do most of the time. And I would like to say I love seeing a lot of the content that comes out by people now telling people to take risks, to challenge themselves, to swim against the grain. For me, though, absolutely. I feel that, and I think it's whether you say it's an introversion thing or a self-confidence thing, I think that negative self-talk and rumination are terrible for a kid, and it gets worse as you get older even. But it can be used, especially, as a positive thing. So for me, firstly, catastrophizing negative self-talk, you can get rid of, right? But you can then turn it into positive self-talk because the brain's controllable. And the second thing is that in regards to rumination, I'll give you an example. When I speak from stage, if I was to critique myself the moment I got off stage, in that emotionally charged moment, my brain would only go to what was negative, and me coming up with things that I could have improved and do better next time would have actually led to this negative rumination. So not a positive thing. But if I look at the speaking event 3 days later and then assess it 3 days later, I'm no longer emotionally charged. So because of that, I can take in what happened, all the variables, and then assess myself openly. And then I can use the rumination, if you like, as a continuous improvement mindset. So when I speak from stage, I don't give myself permission to evaluate my performance until 2 to 3 days later. Now, when I'm selling, when I was cold calling, when I was learning how to sell, I focused on the system, not the sale, which meant that it was an external process. So I didn't take it personally when somebody rejected. And that was great because it made it less emotionally charging. But then the thing you have to understand when that happens is that you still need to do it. You can't wait 3 days. It takes 3 days to improve. So I iterated much faster, but I would iterate at lunch. I would iterate at the end of the day. I wouldn't, I'd focus on the system, not the sale for those periods, because otherwise you're changing everything every second sale. You're letting your emotions get into it. It's messy. But yes, if you were to ask me as a younger child, did I feel like a bit of a loner? Absolutely. Did I test things that sometimes led to positive experiences around my friends and other times led to my friends no longer being my friends or no longer talking to me? Absolutely. Was I willing to do it anyway? Yes. And I think that, I think a lot of people that, as I said, end up successful have to test not what they can get away with, but what makes people tick. And for me, I had to also work out what made me tick. And I feel like even right through also my early 20s, I hadn't really worked that out.
The reason I brought this up was I can, relate to you in that fashion, because I also have a certain like a malformation that I was born with, and that, me growing up also, I couldn't do all the same things that other kids were doing. Like I couldn't play soccer, for example, with other, because I couldn't like run per se, right? And I always felt like I wanted the things that I couldn't get, or I was looking at things that like focusing on the things that I can get, or I can sort of like thinking in my brain, how do I find the solution to a problem, to my problem, and being creative about that, right? So I didn't take for granted of what the others were doing, but rather like thinking outside the box of my ability to approach a certain problem more creatively, to be able to do that things, right? And that helped me a lot, to be able to find the ways, to find the solution that other people didn't see. And it helps me a lot right now to be able to not stop when you see a wall in front of you, or if you see a problem that you cannot find a solution for, you always thinking, oh, there's obviously the solution, right? Because you always find that. Mm-hmm. Do you think being able to find a creative shortcuts is the skill every person who wants to be successful should develop? And I learned this from you because on your website, you put the word shortcuts, and it stuck with me. So question for you about the shortcuts.
So I think that being able to see solutions to problems rather than barriers that are insurmountable is a muscle that you have to grow. And there's also a toolbox or a skill set for that. And I think that different problems require different toolboxes. But a lot of times I'll see somebody they'll try and solve a problem and they're thinking one-dimensionally. Sometimes you've got to take a step back and look at the problem as a whole. And most importantly, you have to validate whether the things you've taken for granted are actually accurate, right? For instance, it was $93 before my first sale. For those people, I mean, we're talking about obviously my book's called The Introvert's Edge. So obviously you understand that I'm an introvert. And a lot of people say, well, you were in the past, but you're not now. Well, that's not true. You can't change who you are. And while I find these activities much more comfortable now, it's because I've done 100 and something interviews. It's easier to practice. It's a muscle, but also planning and preparation makes you phenomenal on stage and phenomenal on podcast interviews. And truthfully, an extrovert without planning and preparation actually is worse off than someone like me, because I have lots of things to draw on, and then I allow myself to present the best version of myself. So the muscle of that could be the muscle of planning and preparation, because a lot of people plan and prepare for 5 minutes and like, oh, this is taking forever. I can plan and prepare for hours. When it comes to solving a problem, a lot of times people will type in, I'm looking for a technology for this. And they'll type into Google and they'll look at the first three. I mean, the statistics around how few people go to past the top 3 searches in Google, or the 3 outcomes, versus the second page, the third page. I'm like to the 10th page, and I'm surprised how often there's a new tech that no one's found that gives me a competitive advantage, because no one else is thinking that way. I also think that my dyslexia, my Erland syndrome, scotomic sensitivity, whatever you want to call it, allowed me to say, okay, the way the world works does not work for me. Mm-hmm. So I was forced to synthesize information because I couldn't consume as much before things like Audible and YouTube came out. Right. So I had to do more with less. And I think people that are able to do more with less have to be more creative. Now, is that a muscle that you can grow? Absolutely. What you want to do is start to imagine how, if you see a technology, how else could it be used? Or how could it be integrated with other things? And when you have challenges, well, the first thing you need to do is take a step back and say, every problem is solvable. I have to take responsibility. And truthfully, there are certain things that aren't your fault. Take responsibility anyway, because there's no way to fix a problem if you're not responsible for the problem. And then secondly, sure, there may be the occasional thing that doesn't have a solution, but I'm always blown away at how many things I think for a split second are insurmountable issues. And then I find a solution just because I believe the solution is there. Like to think about Henry Ford, if you think you can or if you think you can't, you're right. Right? Why would you try if you're not going to finish the marathon? Why would you bother training? If you don't think you can, why would you put in the effort? And if you tell your brain there is no solution, why would your brain spend focus and energy on serving you up an answer? And what happens is you can be in a room of people all talking about certain things, and somebody will be talking about the exact solution that you were looking for. And you'll be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you started talking. What a serendipitous moment. Well, no, we experience 2 million bits of information every single second. Our brain processes 126. I mean, our brain's a supercomputer, but if you think about it that way, what you're talking about is, 2 million to 126. What it has to do is delete, distort, and generalize everything you see, feel, hear, and touch. Mm-hmm. And it does that based on your beliefs, your values, your past experiences, your goals, and what you're saying is important to you. If you say there's no solution to this, it's not going to waste any one of its 126 bits of information on thinking about that answer or listening for that answer in the world. right? So the thing you've got to understand is having that belief that every problem is surmountable. And you're a technology solution, a system away. Gerhard Geschwartner, the founder of Selling Power Magazine, actually, funnily enough, they just named me, Selling Power Magazine just named me as the #1 sales kickoff speaker in the world, which I'm ecstatic about. But one of the things that Gerhard loves about my work is the 93 doors and the fact that I had to make a decision that sales was a system. And then I went looking for it because I couldn't read in books. I typed sales system into YouTube and the videos came up. And the almost systematic way I went about learning it, 8 hours in the field applying what I learned, 8 hours back home practicing the next step or learning about the next step, 16 hours on the weekend. But 6 weeks later, I was the #1 salesperson in the largest sales and marketing company in the Southern Hemisphere. So for him, because he's big on mindset, and helping people break that barrier, because the high performers, if their mindset's wrong, then they're not going to be open to new techniques. If they think something's not possible, they're not going to try. And also, they know a lot of the skill sets. Well, truthfully, they don't. I find even the high achievers have no idea how to tell story, which is why that's what I teach from stage. Right. But the lower achievers, they need mindset before they even think sales is possible. Like for the introverts listening, that maybe you're a person that perhaps aspires to be in sales, and maybe you haven't taken the plunge because you don't believe that sales success is possible for you. Or maybe you're in sales and you've just accepted subpar performance because you don't believe sales is possible for you. And actually, let's cover that for a second. Because if you think I'm some kind of sales, wizard that learned as an introvert, that's not true. Mark Hunter, Meredith Powell, there are so many. Zig Ziglar was an introvert. And if you, but it's different. You clearly are good at small talk. No, right now we're talking about one of my favorite things in the world to talk about. So sure, I can discuss it. But Oprah Winfrey, David Letterman, both introverts. They're pretty good at small talk too, but they do what you do, Michael. They plan and prepare. They're methodical. They've done their research. So therefore, it's a lot easier. And these days, even when you go to a networking room, you can see who's going to come. A lot of times you've got the RSVP list of the conference. You can check it in the app. You can check the meetup group and who's going to go. It is so easy. So what I find is most people do what they've always done, which means they get the same result. Definition of insanity, not working for you. But most people, even if it's not working, they say, poor me, I can't sort it out. And because of that, they don't try. And I'd say one step further, for all the people that are in senior leadership, a lot of you are looking to find out if your team members are introverted to avoid giving them the big deals as opposed to teaching them. And a lot of people in HR, a lot of times they'll say, well, that person can't do that. That person can't do that. One of the things I've learned is everything is a learnable skill. We just have to believe we can learn a system for it and then put actual effort into making sure that we learn it.
Obviously, I don't have anything to add on this. You explained everything, talking about the shortcuts and the muscle, right? I do also agree that it definitely can be, this muscle can be developed, of course. And I think that the more successful you become, or the more projects or problem you're tackling, it's like an experience with an exercise, right? You do the exercise so many times, then the solutions start, being taken from your tongue quickly. More solutions, right? And more things. So I think that, I would say like getting out of your comfort zone and thinking about different ways of solving the same problem.
Well, it's interesting. A lot of people will say that, who do you want to, if you want to invest in someone, would you invest in somebody that had built a multi-million-dollar business and then went bankrupt, or would you invest in somebody that's never done it before? Well, the person that's done it, because they've learned from the mistakes, but they've also built that muscle in a lot of way. So for me, when I think that I've learned how to break through in seconds what takes people years sometimes, because I've worked that muscle. So there are no shortcuts in my mind to starting the process of building that muscle. But to be able to create shortcuts in the future, you have to be willing to build that muscle.
One last question on this block and moving on with something else. I'm curious, have you been deeply passionate about anything when you were a child?
One of the things that, and this is almost an autistic kind of tendency, that a lot of highly successful people tend to fixate, and I do too. So I get passionate about lots of things that I'm doing. But it's easy, and what's interesting, a lot of salespeople will say, like, if, for instance, if I sell insurance, it's hard to get passionate about that. And I'm like, well, hang on a second. No, I mean, insurance is really important for a lot of people. And they're like, okay, well then, yeah, I'm really passionate about it, but I care about helping. So I care about helping everybody. Okay, sure. Really? Do you? Passionate about helping everybody? Yeah, everybody. Okay, well, what about somebody that earns $50,000 a year versus somebody that makes $250,000? Well, the 250. Why?
Right.
Well, it's because they earn more, right? They can buy more products. That's not really passion, right? That is, I'm passionate about making money. That's self-serving, and self-serving passion is different. You may be passionate about how you can use the money, but then I said, okay, well, let's go a little bit deeper into that. And what I said is, what about a person that, I don't know, maybe studied in high school, came from a poor family, got a scholarship to go to Harvard, graduated from Harvard with honors, ends up in a C-level executive job, making $250,000 a year with 10 staff, versus a person that dropped out of college, or maybe dropped out of high school, saved up, started a business, has 10 staff, makes about $250,000 a year. Which one do you care about helping most? Well, I actually worked with a client called Nick about that. Literally, this was the exact exercise we ran through. Right. And he said, well, obviously the small business owner. I'm like, what do you mean? This guy graduated at Harvard with honors and he couldn't even afford to go. Why? And he said, I just feel like they deserve it more. And I'm like, explain that to me. His response was, I had this grandfather and he actually did buy a farm, and he worked so hard in the farm and he hired a bunch of staff, but then he got sick. And he said, he couldn't afford to keep the business anymore because he couldn't stay around and be available. So he had to sell the business. He said he moved in to a flat, a little apartment. And he said, I just watched my grandfather die in front of a TV, really fade away for the last 10 years of his life, and to think that was avoidable. I'm like, what do you mean? You mean he didn't die? Right. He said, well, yeah, but there's these life insurance policies. You can put your high cash flow. If you're a high cash flow business like my grandfather, you can put this money in and then it gets a high yield return. You could put that into investments and then still have the cash flow for your business. Blown away at how much he knew. He was passionate about it because he cared about his grandfather and he saw how the product would help. A lot of insurance people know about it, but not as much as he did, right? So what we did is we actually called him. He'd go to networking events, funnily enough, and not call himself an insurance salesperson. But I said, how would you like to help the hustlers of the world? He's like, that'd be fantastic. I said, great, let's call you the hustle lifeguard then. So when you go to networking events, then talk about how you love to see small business owners, go and do this, but you hate seeing what happens if they don't prioritize themselves, especially if it's avoidable with high cash flow businesses. And that's why you're on a mission to do this. That's how you stimulate passion. Now, I was always passionate when I was younger, but I would attach passion to anything that was a shiny object. And I think that's the mistake a lot of people make when they're young. So for me, I was always able to do that to the point that, about a year in, I got promoted a ton of times after I was successful in sales. They put me in management straight after, I won that, the number one salesperson. And I don't know why people think just because you can sell, you can manage. But there I was now back to YouTube to learn how to manage because I was terrible at it. And I ended up pretty good at it, and I got promoted about 7 times in a year. And then I went and started my own business. And I convinced myself that I was passionate about saving people money on the telephone bill, right? Because $1,000 a year saved, if your markup's 10%, is $10,000, right? It might mean a lot of smaller stores, especially, that could mean they could take an extra day off a month, or that 10,000 could mean they could take their kids to Disneyland or something. So I convinced myself that I was excited about this, but truthfully, it didn't feel like it was significant enough for me. Now, firstly, if you have a product that you're selling or a service, these days with unemployment being what it is, you can go get another job. You should never sell something you don't believe in. And a lot of the sales strategies I teach, I'm like, take this with a duty of care. Do not use these techniques, like especially my storytelling process that focuses on emotive storytelling and creating 3-dimensional stories. Because of the science behind that, it is so compelling because I believe sales is to serve clients, right? And the best way to serve your client, and by the way, that's actually the true definition, right? The Scandinavian term the Scandinavian word for to serve your clients is sales, right? It actually came from that. The best way you can serve your clients is not to make them think about it if your product is going to benefit them. Get them out of their own way. Get them to make a decision. It's not manipulative as long as your product or service helps them, and storytelling is amazing at that. So for me, when, I was looking at all sorts of, processes and systems, I always went with, I gravitated to story. A story was my favorite thing, but so I became passionate about story, and I invested that into telecommunications. But when I think about telecommunications, I liked it, but it was just a good way to make money, and I could convince myself, but I wasn't super passionate about it. And so actually, funnily enough, in 2003, I won the Young Achiever of the Year award in Melbourne, Australia. And this was because of my work in the telecommunications company, right? We created the largest brokership in the country. And I remember going home and I was miserable. It was the saddest day I think I've had in a very long time. Actually, probably at that point my whole life. And what it was I was like, if this is what success looks like, we can keep it. Like I created that success and I became passionate about it. But I even was kind of passionate about just proving all those people that thought that I would never be successful, that I would never amount to anything, wrong, making great money. And the rest was kind of a lie about the bills because it wasn't a big enough impact. So now while I speak at a lot of corporate organizations, even my storytelling keynote, I deliver my personal story of introversion in it. So yeah, the high achievers, they'll hear that I've been responsible for 5 multi-million-dollar success stories, my sales success, and they'll be like, you know what, I'm going to stop and listen. But the lower achievers usually see a speaker on stage and go, you know what, this isn't for me. I'm never going to be able to learn it. It's not going to work for me. I don't have gift of gab. So I share my introversion story. So even though I talk to small businesses about obtaining rapid growth and I talk to larger organizations about embracing storytelling, what I'm really passionate about is inspiring introverts to realize they're not second-class citizens. Their path to success is just different. But what that means is through the ideology I share, I can empower everybody because the introverts are the ones that walk out thinking it's not possible. And now they get the opportunity to walk out going, wow, I can do this too. I mean, if he can with that horrible acne and the glasses and things like that, I can do it too. And so there is a difference between shiny object passion and real roaring passion. And what you're experiencing today, when you think about the amount of energy I'm putting into this, and traditionally, things deplete your energy, and this still does, but nowhere near as much because I'm passionate about it, because I'm planned practice, which takes a lot less emotion. This is a real raw passion, and that is very, very different. So if you have fake passion, if you have shiny object passion, or if you have no passion at all, trust me when I tell you this, life is too short. My gosh, you need this passion because it gets you out of bed in the morning and it means you want to do it. Like if your favorite thing to do is what you do for work, that is amazing because most people begrudgingly go to work to go home and drink away their sorrows of the fact they spent 8 hours, and then both sides of their life is terrible. So this is a really important thing for you to find in your life, and there are products and services out there you can sell to do that.
Yeah, the reason I asked about the being deeply passionate about something when you were a child is I saw a lot of people getting passionate about something like a sport, right? And they are into this for their entire life, and they have a few passions like that they are like some very, very into that create some kind of a ritual for them that they are falling into. And the reason I ask this of you, because as you mentioned, like being dyslexic and you are rigorously focusing on one thing and being very good at it because it's like you are like all in with that thing. And that, this is the conclusion that I got when I read about you running or establishing 5 multi-million-dollar businesses in a different industries, right? As if sort of like you are one time fixated to finding the solution to a problem. You are very into that. You are disrupting the market, disrupting the bigger players. You are achieving what you had, but then you need to shift your focus on something else or another, shiny things that was out there that you can focus on rigorously, right? But because you didn't have a deeply passionate things when you were growing up, the one that you are still with you were not burdened by the certain rituals that you were spending your time on. So you can quickly refocus your attention on something else. There are a couple of ways to answer that because you use sports as a specific example. So I was really into rugby, it's Australian sport, English sport, not so much an American sport, really into basketball growing up. But a lot of people it's actually popular to be into sports when you're younger. Right. What's interesting is in Melbourne, Australia, I was really into rugby because I spent a few years in Sydney. Australia and Melbourne didn't care about rugby back then. They were AFL, like the Australian Football League. So it was actually unpopular to be interested in the sports that I was in. Right. But basketball was something that I did enjoy, and it's something that allowed me to foster connection with people and those sorts of things. And I was pretty into it. I mean, I would practice basketball a couple of hours every night to make sure because I just enjoyed it. But there were other things that used to take my focus also. And what I find is a lot of people fixate on a single thing. And the sports thing, I mean, that's great. If you're going to be a basketball player, fixate. But a lot of people will go to sports as an escape, not as a place of passion. Yes, and they are passionate about it, don't get me wrong. But it's a lot of people, and I will say this, like Nick, for instance, the example I gave you, the insurance salesperson. What it is sports is an easy passion to inherit. Our families are into it. Our friends are into it. We find a team and we're almost
completely not listening for how bad our team is, even if, like a lot of times, let's face it, there could be a scandal and we forgive the players because we're so passionate about that team. But what happens is we get given that from our families, and it's easy to get behind them. We're excited, and it's easy to see and live through them. But that's you seeing and living through them. What you've got to realize is that it's easy to ask, what am I passionate about? I'm passionate about the sports because I was given that. I say this all the time. I've got a podcast. Well, I've got two. I've got the Introverts Edge podcast, but the one that's more relevant to this statement is the Better Business Coach podcast. And there's a podcast episode. It's episode 17. It's called Forget About Goals. Why is the key to success? And what I talk about is, the fact that what I do is I get people to write 3 business goals, 3 personal goals, one selfish to themselves, because sure, that'll drive them. But then, I then get them to summarize each goal in 250 words or less, including why it's important to them. And it's about getting to the passion, the mission, the driving why. And what you'll find is any high achiever is really good at writing goals. But when they're forced to write the why, they quickly realize those goals aren't important to them. They've inherited that goal from their mother, their father, their, drunk roommate they had in college. They hear these things like, that's what I want. They spend the rest of their life charging after it. But they haven't really thought it through. So it forces them to be confronted with the reason why they're empty on the inside is that those goals aren't fulfilling to them. Now, introverts sometimes have that passion, but they're very logical and practical minded, so they struggle to articulate it. So either way, you've got to figure out what your goals are and what your passions behind them are and how to articulate that. Because if you don't, you won't be able to follow and make decisions and stay congruent to it and educate other people for why you're not interested in this, but interested in this because you have this passion. When you get people to do that, they go, oh my gosh, my whole life I've been chasing goals, because they never ask themselves. Well, the truth is you didn't ask yourself which sport team in a lot of cases. It was given to you. You've inherited it from your mother, your father, or your mates in college or high school, primary school. So what you need to understand when it comes to passion is perhaps you don't know how to ask yourself the questions. In my networking book, The Introverts Edge to Networking, in the second chapter, and I kind of laugh and I say, I know you thought you were buying a book on networking, so this personal development stuff is probably a little bit like, what is this in here? But bear with me because trust me, it's important. But I believe you can create a rapid growth business or career in anything, but there's nothing worse than rapid growth business with customers you can't stand in a business you don't like, or a career you can't stand with a boss you don't like. So what you really need to understand is where that passion is, because then you can learn to articulate it. My belief is introverts actually spend more time on reflection, and because of that, they're more likely to know what they're passionate about but struggle to articulate it. A lot of extroverts struggle to even consider it. But both groups, it's an epidemic of no one asking themselves what they're passionate about. There's a book called, the terrible name for the book for the females, I'm not suggesting that I approve the name of the book. And I actually don't really even like the book that much. But the first chapter I love. It's called The Way of the Superior Man. And the first chapter really talks about the fact that men used to go into the forest to find themselves and figure out what their purpose was. And they may do it several times. In Australia, we call it walkabout, right? The Aboriginals used to do it. No one does that anymore. No one spends time. They're like, what do I want in my life? Oh, my phone's beeping. Oh, somebody called, right? It's ridiculous the little amount of time we spend deciding how we're going to spend our life, yet how much time we spend living it unhappily.
I'm curious. So 5 multi-million dollar businesses, different industries. I found just a few. I didn't find all 5. Can we quickly go over them, what they are? Because I think that just for the listeners, it's just to support your point, how laser focused you've been and how different the niches are.
Yeah, absolutely. So first thing that's important to understand is while the industries are in a lot of ways different, the ideology I applied to each of them is the same. That's why with small businesses, for instance, the consultant, I only work with people on short-term engagements, and I'm talking like 6 hours. That's all I work with them on. And I'm like, that's because to want a coach of my level, like what I'm really good at is helping them differentiate, niche down, create packaging that stimulates purchasing behavior, tell great stories, build that into the sales networking, their online presence. And at that point, they don't need a coach of my caliber anymore, right? Because once you've done that, to me, the rest of it's kind of boring. So when I work with small business, it's not that I can't help. It's not that I don't want to help. It's that why would I ask them to pay a coach of my caliber to continue to help them when there are 1,000 other coaches that can't do that, but they can do that at a much lower fee? So, and some of them don't even need coaching, and some of them have their own mentors or whatever that looks like. So what you got to understand is while the business are different, the ideology I applied. So yes, I disrupted the market. So that might be saying, well, as a coder, well, you invented a finance app and then you invented Canva. Well, yeah, okay, but the experience and the working out the pain points and then creating a great user interface, a lot of those elements are the same. And for me, it all comes to, I find that people are really great at their functional skill. But the reason why they're stuck in this endless hamster wheel of struggling to find interested people, trying to set themselves apart, trying to make the sale, all while feeling that people are only caring about price, is because they so focus on their educating people on their functional skill and retooling on their functional skill. And they spend no time learning the three things that are outside the scope of the functional skill that really give them the opportunity to create a rapid growth business that revolves around them, their family, and their life. And I find the same in sales, right? We spend so much time educating people on our tech product or our finance product. We really don't spend the time thinking about, we really don't spend the time really developing our experience in differentiating ourselves in the sales, as a salesperson, as an account manager, as even just a person, doing a cold call, and then learning the process for actually doing that. But my first businesses were actually pretty closely related. So the first one was telecommunications, which the telecommunications was my first job was in telecommunications. I went out and I built it was the largest brokership for business to business cell phones in the country. Right. But then I moved across to electricity, right? So I knew that I was great I got bored. And I mean, if somebody mentioned another call rate to me, I would have gone insane, but I felt like I needed to stay in the realm of services that consumers or business owners used and saving people money, because the sales process that I created was all around, saving people money. And actually what's funny when you think about it now is I teach people, like I worked with an accountant recently that was literally booked out 100, like he was working 100 hours plus a week, earning less than 50,000 a year. And it took us 14 weeks to do this, but literally now he earns over 150,000 a year. And he works just over a 40-hour work week. Funnily enough, we were able to retain 83% of his clients. So the thing is that most people undercharge. So one of the things, and this was a huge turning point for me, was learning how to go from saving people money sales to getting people to spend money, even if it wasn't the cheapest sales. Totally different motivations, totally different sales processes, both hugely valuable and for different products. And funnily enough, I know ones that people were saving people money and now they're charging people money because they thought that was the easy pitch. But why do that if you can charge more and still get the client if they're getting great value? So I moved from telecommunications to electricity, right? So we had, electricity was the next phase. And then when I moved out of that, I moved into education. And nationally accredited education. So you're equivalent of a college. And, that worked really, really well. And I loved the whole education space. And, we were the fastest growing RTO, which is, like a 1 year certificate kind of qualification. And we focused actually just on the niche of tradespeople. And that, we love that. I got to help so many people. But what I found is I didn't like the rigid structure that the educational system provided. So what I then did is we moved into business coaching. But the business coaching was, I had lots of coaches that were all out servicing clients. And, it's harder to teach people sales and marketing. It's easier, systems process, right? A lot of coaches, it's so hilarious. You have a lot of coaches out there that if you want help with systems processes, time management, gosh, they'll help you with everything, but they struggle to sell themselves. They'll say they can help you with sales. Take that with a grain of salt. Like, I only help people in my zone of genius. Do not let another coach you on what's outside their zone of genius, just because they do not understand how that they should be staying inside their box. Now, truthfully, because they can't sell and market, often they will take on any hour they can get with the client because they need the money, right? So don't offend them. Don't get them to defend themselves. Understand their zone of genius and just don't use them for that, or help them understand that you want to use them for what they're best at, not what they're not. Like for me, I work with a lot of coaches that refer me clients. I do the the thing to improve the sales and marketing processes, and then I hand them back because I don't want to do that bit, and I'm not as good as some of the other people at doing that. But what I found by doing that is that I didn't get the opportunity to help the end user, and I wasn't getting the opportunity to do what I really wanted to do. And that was have a real impact on people, myself personally, and really experience that. So I ended up helping people sell coaching, helping people with coaching ideology. And I didn't love that because, again, I felt disconnected. And the last one was construction before, I moved to the United States, because I decided, well, I then want something super, super scalable. But again, I make great money, didn't really get the opportunity to have that contact. And I went, well, maybe it's not possible because, coaching businesses aren't scalable. Speaking businesses aren't scalable. I was wrong. Back then I was scared of the online space and also I take a lot of pride from the fact I learned to sell as an introvert. Now, a lot of times these days you can use the messaging online where you don't have to cold call anymore. That kind of makes half of what I learned that I was proud of obsolete. So when I moved here, I did a bit of soul searching when I was, in my 30s, and kind of call it my early midlife crisis. But what I decided is that I wanted to do something truly meaningful, even if that meant that I made less money. But then I realized that what I wanted to do was inspire introverts and predominantly help introverted service providers realize they're not second-class citizens and help them grow. And what actually was funny is people are like, no one's going to pay you. Like, no one pays big money. As small business owners can't do that. They can't afford it, especially the group you're going to have. And I went, well, I believe that I can, and I'm going to put hard work and systems behind it. And funnily enough, everybody complains that small businesses won't pay them to help them create rapid growth. I just haven't had that as an issue. And now, and this was a mindset barrier that I had to get beyond, because my father got laid off twice, and one of them was the only time I saw my father cry. And for me, that left such an emotional scar. I didn't really trust corporations for a long time. And so it wasn't that I wasn't open to inspiring introverts and sales teams. It's that I didn't trust organizations. And what I've realized is the organizations my father worked for weren't the best organizations. And also he wasn't great at promoting himself within them sometimes. So because of that, he was laid off. And that is sad, but not the fault. It's like getting broken up with two girlfriends and now all girls are terrible. So funnily enough, it took me until I was 35 to forgive corporations for what they did to my father in my teens. But I love doing that as well now. But when you think about it, though, I'm applying the same strategies, the same processes, perhaps in a higher level way, like because I'm using digital marketing now and mediums that aren't face to face, sometimes, programs and online courses and video streams and this sort of stuff like podcast. But I'm applying the same ideology, the same level of storytelling, the same systems, the same messaging, the same passion mission framework to everything that I've worked in.
Now it makes sense. Okay, thank you so much for clarifying that, because I wasn't clear on that one. Now, I want to touch base on the period of, as you mentioned, your 30s, right? And by the age of 30, right, you had achieved a professional success, right, by anyone's standards, right? Mm-hmm. How does one stay humble?
Well, you don't.
How did you stay humble?
You don't. You have to learn.
You were not humble.
So unfortunately, and I will say I am now humble, but that was also a learned skill, right? When nobody gives you a compliment, the first time somebody does, you enjoy it a lot, right? You got to understand, I grew up with a father that broke his back for 80 hours a week to support the family. I grew up feeling like the slow kid. And then all of a sudden, I went from getting fired from a real estate job. And before you think about me out the front selling, I wasn't. I was in the back doing data entry, applying for 3 door-to-door sales roles because that was the only jobs in the paper, because I lost my job just before Christmas, and we take a month off because it's summer and Christmas at the same time in Australia. Right. And then mastering that and becoming the number 1 salesperson in the country to the point where I was working from 14 and 9 months at McDonald's for $220 a week to support the family while I was at school, smelling like McDonald's burgers all the time with bad acne, which I'm sure the oil from the McDonald's thing did not help. And then all of a sudden, I went from making no money and this really tough period where, because you didn't get paid for 60 days because it was commission only until the sales all transpired, to making close to $3,000 to $4,000 a week. And it became, for me, I had this feeling that I was, and it was a lack of confidence. I felt like something. Eventually, it was imposter syndrome. I felt like eventually I was going to get caught out for not really knowing I lucked out in my world. And there were a couple of things to that. So because of that, I earned a lot of money, but I felt like it was always going to disappear. And because of that, I still stayed humble at that point. And then we got to a point where around 2 years into my first multi-million-dollar success story, where I was making so much money, I had an apartment that most people would dream of. I had 3 cars downstairs. I had all the best of everything you can imagine. And I would go out on the weekend and I would spend like $1,000 just making other people happy. But was it really about that, or was it about them recognizing I make money? Well, in retrospect, I'm not sure, to be honest. I'd like to think my motivations were pure. But the truth was that I had an ego about myself at that point. And it was false. It was because, and I remember there's a scene in Titanic where, and this means I have to admit that I was watching Titanic. I'm going to say, because Leonardo DiCaprio was an introvert, that I was only watching it because of that. But the thing that I will say is that there's this scene where this person's being showy about the money she makes. And these older people go, she's new money, right? I was new money, and I was also new confidence. And those two things together, and I remember, and there was this defining moment, and I'm not going to mention the guy's name or the company, but one of the largest chains of real estate agents in Australia. The son of one of the guys that owned that lived in my apartment complex, and I met him at the gym and we started spending some time together, which actually made me even worse on that spectrum. And I remember at one time we were at the races, and, in Australia we have, the Melbourne Cup. It's a super big deal. And I remember we were there and he was trying to talk up this girl. And she then walked off with this other guy who was an electrician or a plumber or something. And he yelled across where we were, go on, spend the next 20 years paying off a mortgage then. And I remember being disgusted with that. And it was about that time that I made different changes in my life. I went down to one car. I didn't care what type of car it was. I moved out of that, moved out into the suburbs. I stopped buying a whole bunch of really expensive clothes that I didn't wear. And my whole life transitioned, but it took that shock of, oh my gosh, this is somebody I'm actually aspiring to be. And so for the people listening that have never got to that point, like, it's easy to say, follow your passion when you actually make really good money or you have lots of money. And it's like, well, no, it's easy for you, but I need to make it first. Actually, I could have made it even if I did that from the beginning. And it's easy to tell somebody that, when you start making money, you shouldn't be flashy. Well, the first time you own it, you're like, well, I just want people to know. I mean, everybody in my life said to me that I was never going to make anything. Surely I get to enjoy this for a period of time. Well, what I found, especially as an introvert, you beat yourself up at night about the things that you did that you shouldn't have done, but you don't learn because you try and excuse it away because you're excited about it. One of the biggest lessons that I learned was being humble and being open and honest about this, and to put your defenses down and to share that is a huge thing for anyone. And I see people tell their stories, and I'm always open. One of the professional speaker that I'm really good friends with sent me a TEDx speech to look at recently. And he talked about how when the COVID crash happened, he wasn't lucky enough to have diversified income, and he went into depression, and, now he's feeling better now. Right. And that's great. Right. But being able to share that inspires others. And so I would like to say that I was humble from the beginning, but I don't think that helps anybody. The truth is I had to learn to be humble. And funnily enough, I've got, and I'm not going to mention who, but a person I'm very close with, their best friend is going through that phase right now. And it also creates a level of forgiveness, because even though they buy the most expensive things on the menu and they don't eat it, even though they behave showy, I've been in that phase. And I understand that either I wouldn't have heard somebody else tell me. It was something they have to understand themselves. And since that discovery, that's why personal development has been so critical to me, because what I've realized is there are things in our life that are outside the scope of our understanding and outside the scope of what we're willing to admit out to ourselves. And sometimes it's somebody else admitting it about themselves, or you reading something that gets you to take an inward look. But again, you have to assume everything's your fault. And funnily enough, when that happened, people stopped resenting how much money I was making compared to them. And everything lined up. There were people that were willing to introduce me to more people because they felt like what I offered really helped, and they felt like I was passionate. Because until then, and this is the same with goals. You may have passions, but if your goals are all money focused as opposed to make money from doing this thing I'm passionate about, how can you not come across as transactional and feel inauthentic? But all of a sudden, if that stuff is all in alignment, you just get this feeling of authenticity. And that's why, to me now, thinking about that, I'm embarrassed about that period. But there may be some people listening that are going through that period, and maybe this message helps them. Stop doing it. It's not helping you, and it's actually pushing you away from those people. It's not impressing the people that you're trying to impress. It's actually getting them to go, I don't like them as much now, or they're pretty showy, and all of that stuff was a lack of confidence. And if it's coming from that point, which I know it was for me, then what you need to realize is you need to let go of what happened in the past, and you need to have a real look in what's important to you and where you can put the line for why other people are important to you and how far you're willing to go to make them feel like they like you.
I have another broad question, but I specifically wanted to leave it broad. Are you happy now?
I'm ecstatic now. I love my life. If you had have asked me the same question, as I said, winning Young Achiever of the Year award in Melbourne, Australia, everybody got to hear about it. Everybody that thought I was worth nothing, I'd proven that I was making great money. I was living in that apartment I was telling you about with the 3 cars, all that sort of thing. Absolutely not happy. Miserable would have been a better word. And wondering whether or not it was even worth it, right? All this work, like if that's what success looks like, you can stick it. Now, again, I think that the psychology is that, and don't get me wrong, I understand good marketing, right? If you can market to somebody and make them want that expensive thing or make them feel like their life is just a little bit less good because they don't have that item, it makes people want to drive and make money. And that works for everyone, right? Because when you're higher up in the food chain, you can afford more, so you can show it off more. It's great for your ego. And it also motivates everybody else to become you. All of that, total rubbish. I bought into all of that. I learned that it was all rubbish way too late in my life. And hopefully, and when I say too late in my life, it's because I lost seconds, minutes, days, hours, months, years. There are a lot of people that don't even learn this until they're 50. And then they get to 55 retirement age and all they have is regret. They have fake friends. They have people that hang out with them only because they own cool things, or they can only hang out with because they all share the excitement about these cool things that they didn't even really like. They just thought that successful people own boats.
That's a great segue to move to the stage of your life that I was very curious about, that you didn't write a lot about, but there's some kind of events from that period of time. So right at that point in your life when you decided to go traveling around the world, right? You already touched base a little about what made you to go traveling, right? But can we go back to that period in time and just sit on it for a minute or two? Just can you paint for me like where were you at that point in time when you decided I'll go traveling? I'm good where I am right now, but I need to explore. I need to find myself.
Perfect. Well,
what was going in your head back then?
So I'm going to frame this in 2 ways for you because I think it's important. I was in a very lucky position to be able to do that. There are a lot of other people that aren't as lucky as I was at that point or in their part of their life, whatever age group they are. I would suggest you do this anyway. Now, I'm not suggesting you do exactly what I do because it may not be affordable. It may not be, you can't take the time. Maybe you've got kids at home and you can't exactly travel the world for a year like I did. But I got to about halfway through 2012 and I had a look at myself, and I have to say, like, we got audited, education, you get audited, right? It's just what happens. But it was so much work. I remember I started to get a twitch in my eye and I started to get stressed about things. And not stressed in a negative way. It was affecting me, not emotionally, not personally, but unconsciously. Right. I had a little eye twitch and things like that. But I had to look into self a little bit. And what I realized was, I'd worked 80 to 100 hours a week for as long as I could remember. And when you talk about that fixation of passion, right, I'd been fixated. Like I had girlfriends. My longest girlfriend at that period was like 6 weeks because they'd be really into them when I was taking like over the Christmas holidays or something like that. And then I'd fixate back and work and I'd love that. But more so, like I'd worked so hard. It's not that I didn't have time to spend time doing my hobbies. I couldn't even really remember what they were anymore. And so about July of 2012, I made the decision and it's unfortunate. It's bankrupt now, Groupon. I joined Groupon, not so much for the discounts, but I joined it. I'm sure there's other websites just like this now, but I joined it because I wanted to be presented with opportunities for activities every day. So around that period, I got my motorbike license. I learned the language. I was pretty rubbish at that. I learned photography. I hated that. I learned to scuba dive. I went rap jumping. I, did a whole bunch of really cool things that allowed me to realize what I liked, what I didn't like, and really lean into that. And then what I found is that because I had such a successful trajectory, people started to see that as like I'd lost interest or I was getting bored. And, because I grew up in a blue collar kind of community, it was, well, what are you going to do next? What are you going to do next? You're only as good as your last day. It was almost like that catch me if you can period of, where the dad's like, keep running, right? What are you doing now? Where are you going next? And I'm like, I got to get out of here because my mindset. Now, I will say I've learned strategies since then. And what I've learned how to educate other people that I am not open to their dialogues on certain topics. And that's really important. But if you don't know what you're passionate about or what's important to you, and at that point, what I was passionate about is working out what my goals should be, what business I wanted to run. I always knew working for myself was it, but also how I wanted the rest of my life to look like. And I now know I could have put all those barriers up without ever leaving the country. But what I decided in the end of 2012, I decided I was going to get on a plane. I was going to, and I was going to travel the world for a year. And I told myself that what I was doing was looking for which place to open up a business next. Because I'd done a lot of what Australia had to offer, right? Like every business had grown to a certain point. And remember, I didn't know anything about online. I probably would never have left now if I knew about online, because today you can get people to chase you from everywhere, right? It's really not that hard. And I will say, if you've got a vanilla message like I sell insurance, you're going to find it really difficult. But if you are the rapid growth guy for introverted service providers, or you're the hustle lifeguard for people with high cash flow businesses, for instance, then you're going to find it pretty easy, because if you can't be the clearest, you have to be the loudest. Go to more networking events, post a blog post every day, podcast every second. But if you're the clearest, you don't have to be the loudest. People chase you like you did with me, right? You reached out to me. I wasn't reaching out saying, hey, can I be on your podcast? Or, hey, can I be on your show? And I bet you get thousands of those that you ignore because you're like, another guy's selling insurance, another guy's selling legal services. So the thing for me was, I just decided that I was going to take a year for myself. And my family didn't expect me to last the year. I didn't really expect me. And in truth, I didn't, but that was for a different reason, which I'll explain. But I went to South America for 3 months because I was like, let's try a totally different nature, totally different continent, really. But what I realized is what allowed me to be successful is language, right? And I learned, the way I tell stories, most people think they tell a story in business well, and they're wrong. Like, I tell stories more like the story of how you met your husband or your wife, right? Like, at the start, maybe it's a little bulky, but you retract certain things, you embellish on others. Like, the story of how I met my wife now is more like a theatrical masterpiece. I say certain things, she says certain things, we hold hands, we look at each other, like, so that's how we met. But, the framing for, the whole concept of discovering where to be, it didn't occur to me. Like, I thought that I would be comfortable with that. But what I found is I felt disconnected. I felt lonely in those areas because I couldn't communicate in a way that I so knew how to do. And, I know there's a lot of people, and it's funny, like my sales book, The Introverts Edge, the white cover, it's actually one of the biggest, interesting things is Spanish, right? Most people think Spanish people are very extroverted, very outgoing. And there's actually quite a lot of introverts, but you get a person from Mexico and bring them to the US and get them to speak English. Now they're more reserved because they believe that their language isn't good. And I'm always blown away at how many people from Denmark or Mexico speak better English than most of us do. But it was important to me. And as I said, I tried to learn a language in 2012. It didn't stick. So of course I was going to struggle. Language, I struggled enough with one language. Now we're going to make it two. Come on. But I got to the US and I actually didn't mean to travel to Austin, but I loved the city of Austin. And it was recommended from a friend of mine in Argentina who actually lived in Houston. And it was somebody I met while I was there. And I then said, I want to come back and I want to see it again. And it was that when I met my now wife. But what actually happened was I said, well, yes, but not yet. Like, I need to find myself. I need to go on this discovery. So I spent 3 months traveling the US. I spent 3 months traveling Europe. And then I was supposed to do Asia. And then I went, you know what? Right. I miss this girl. I came back to the US and, then had to come back to get my my visa then became a green card. But the the thing for me was that period of finding myself, I could have truncated that into probably 30 days because the questions that I asked myself are in lots of good books. The things that I focused on probably could have done myself by just studying NLP and just sitting and doing some good, hard work on myself for 3 days. But I didn't know how to do that. Those were skill sets. I'd learned how to get great at business, but personal development was something, the reflection, that sort of thing was stuff I'd naturally done and learned how to harness so it wasn't a disadvantage. But asking myself what I loved in life and what I was interested in and what's going to be meaningful enough to make me stick in it, right? I mean, I've done this nearly 10 years now and I still love it like I did the day I started. And none of that would have come. My entire life is something that I enjoy. And so, yes, I am happy, but it came from that ability, not the 2013 trip, but the 2013 things that I'd learned that, as I said, for the average person listening, take a 3-day weekend, read The Art of Superior Man, follow some other development books that'll help you work out what you're passionate about. Read chapter 2 of The Introverts Edge to Networking. Again, it doesn't need to be my book though, just do it. Just spend that time because my life is forever better. Because one thing I can tell you is I knew how to make really good money. I didn't know how to be really happy. And it took far less time to learn how to be really happy as it took to learn how to be really good at business or really good at sales and marketing, which takes still a ton less time than usually most people's degrees.
So let's go back for a second for that time of the traveling. So you said that you did have a plan, that your plan was you wanted to explore other markets that you can open up kind of a business on. That was sort of like a business, business.
It was a way I felt
right. But then you wanted to be also like to explore yourself, to find the happy. So you said, but you wanted to be with yourself and you wanted to kind of get away from things, right? Absolutely. What was one or two questions that you wanted to get answers for the travel? Did you have a certain like, hey, I wanted to have an answer to that question while I'm traveling? And if you did, how you were looking for the answer to that question? Like starting with South America that you spent 3 months on.
The answer is I actually thought that, I guess what I did was the old-fashioned walkabout, right? I went into the bush and I came out, but I got distracted for a lot. And this is the thing, when you're achievement focused or you find passion around shiny objects, it's very easy for it to become about seeing all of the sights and doing all of the activities, and you can create a full-time job out of a holiday, right? So what I decided is that the question that I wanted to answer is, what could I spend my work life doing that would make me feel like I was providing the most meaningful thing that I could to the world? And then how could I also do that in a way that would allow me to have balance in my life, that would allow me to have more than just that business in my life? And, I think that for a lot of coaches, they think the best way to scale is to get more clients. Well, no, put your prices up or create a scalable program. And a lot of professional speakers think that the best way to do it, because there's a line for what people charge before they get less gigs. I'm like, well, get less gigs, charge more, create a diversified income so you don't have to care, right? So for me, what I realized is that just because I could doesn't mean that I should. So people ask me all the time, could you help me with this? Could you help me with this? Could you help me with this? And I'm like, yeah, but so could everyone else. And, for me, I feel like you should do that. But if you're a business owner that's an introverted service provider, you absolutely should work with me. And if you are an organization that educates customers instead of leveraging the power of story, that's absolutely where I fit. And if you've gone, and especially important, if a company's gone through a merger or an acquisition or, things like that, where people are unsure about their job, or things like that, then story's great because you can do a double meaning where you can inspire people about where they're heading and the story of that, as well as the story of, teaching people how to tell stories in the world of sales. But those are the two things that I love to do. Like I love teaching people that stuff.
So you didn't. So in other words, you could find the answer to the questions, but you don't necessarily need to travel for that. It's just traveling was just changing the scenery, right? Or something, just other experiences. But then the answer you were looking within yourself, right, and within what you can be happy about, and just kind of self-reflecting on things, right? So the travel was just a good byproduct, right? But then you can do that same in Australia, you can do the same like.
To put in perspective,
right?
And actually, let me make it simpler. So firstly, I always tell people they don't need to buy my book, because if you think you can't sell, the Introverts Edge, if you go to the introvertsedge.com, you can download the first chapter, and it will literally convince you to make the best salesperson, and it will give you a 7-step process. If you do nothing more than grab what you currently say and put it into that, you'll realize some things don't fit, like over-educating the client, throw that out. You'll realize there's some things that are out of order. You'll realize there's some gaping holes like storytelling. If you do nothing more than that, you'll double your sales in the next 60 days. So while I tell people that they don't need to buy my book if their goal is to believe they can sell as an introvert or learn how to sell as an introvert, I'm going to go against that for the question you asked. And what that is, and as I said, Better Business Coach podcast episode 17 will start that process. But one of the funny things is that I believe that success in sales or business comes from really being able to ask those questions, to open to ignite the fire in your belly. So for me, I felt like that was important. Now, I couldn't put it in the book, but what I did is I put it in the video implementation training that comes with the book. So the Introverts Edge book, actually, Global Gurus listed as one of the top 5 sales development programs in the world. And what's funny is all of the other programs are thousands of dollars, and I give away mine free with the book, as long as, so it's a no-brainer for most people. But the answer is that what I realized is I needed to be able to, the question that I needed to clearly be able to articulate, if you want the short code version of it, is, what am I passionate about? What change do I want to see in the world? What difference do I want to see? I don't care if you're just really passionate about customer-centric interaction, or you just love seeing CRMs increase productivity. Right? But again, and I'm not talking about you love watching movies or you love baseball, right? I'm talking about what meaningful change are you passionate about seeing in the world? Whatever that is, then how do you articulate that from I love to see this, I hate to see this perspective? And then how do you then turn that into a mission, a marching cry? I mean, think about this insurance person that's trying to save people from second class retirements because they're the hustlers and they created, they deserve this. A guy selling insurance can have that much passion about what he does. Everyone here can too. And then you need to connect that to your goals and say, okay, so these are my goals, but these goals, and again, introverts specifically are so matter of fact. I want to make this many sales. I want to make this much money in my business. Sure, but do you want to if you was just about the money, you would be in Nigeria doing scams. And I probably shouldn't be racist. The scams coming everywhere, right? But the Nigerian ones are the most well-known, and you'd be making great money. But you want to make money authentically. You want to make money doing something that's meaningful. Well, if in that case, it's not just about the money, is it? So you want to make this amount of money or this many sales to help people with this mission to get them to a successful outcome, because you want to serve. Because the best way to serve somebody on your mission is to get them to buy your stuff, so that A, you can help them get the outcome, and B, you can afford to spend more money on marketing to get more people to come and talk to you about working with them.
Nice. Okay. Got it. All right. So 3 months South America, 3 months US, 3 months Europe. You have any crazy story that you can share? Something that just blew mind of the listeners?
Well, I mean, experience-wise, Iguazu Falls in Argentina is amazing, and Brazil is listed as one of the top. It's 110 waterfalls that converge in one place. It's the most amazing place I've ever been to, and it's on the border of Brazil and Argentina. And Brazil is on the top 10 natural wonder place. I think they're just better at marketing themselves, because the Argentinian side is by far better. You stand in the mouth of the waterfall, and I mean, if you want to propose, or maybe you just really don't like someone, but you want them to do something that they don't want to do, take them there, ask them the question. I promise they'll agree to anything if you ask them on there, because it is such an uplifting, unbelievable experience. Crazy story. I mean, I ran with the Bulls in Spain, and the running with the Bulls experience, I actually saw some guy with his whole head smashed in bruises, and a lot of the people in Spain, they didn't care. They're just running. And I'm like, somebody's got it. So me and one other person actually helped this poor guy get into the side so the paramedics could get to him. And, the funny thing, how many people kept pushing into us and pushing past us while we were trying to help this guy, because it's running with the Bulls. And unfortunately, obviously people drink a little bit sometimes on that. Sometimes people are just partying. Sometimes people are just having fun. But I actually did make it into the auditorium. I had a wonderful time. Would it be an experience I would do again? No. Am I glad that I did it? Absolutely. And I think that for me, I grew up scared of heights, scared of a lot of things. That year was kind of liberating for me, because I did a lot of things that I wouldn't normally have done.
Mm-hmm. So running with bulls was the one of the scariest thing you've done, yeah?
Well, actually, no, I've done rap jumping. So rap jumping is like rappelling, but you do it face first. So you run down the side of a building face first. It's a huge amount of fun because
oh my god,
it's enjoyable. But but if you ask me the scariest thing I've done, that is probably the scariest because you're the one holding it, right? So when you're rappelling, you're not looking. I always felt that disconcerting. Right. When you're running down, like and this is what I mean about mindset. And I think look it up for people that are listening, look it up. But rap jumping, the thing I love about it is you're holding onto a rope and there's a person behind you and a person in front of, like down at the bottom of the building. And sometimes you're running down 20 stories, sometimes 10, sometimes 30, right? People have different rules in different countries. And, sometimes only one building will let you and that's only 10 floors. But the thing that's important is when you're standing on the ledge, you actually have to tell yourself it is okay to now stand on the side of the building rather than on top of it. So you have to, it's a huge power of mind control, right? Because now don't get me wrong, there are people that just don't care about their life, I'm sure, that just do it. But for someone like me, I know I said I wasn't entirely happy, but I didn't want to die either. So for me, when I did that, it was kind of terrifying. But what's interesting is if you can control your mind, and I think, resilience is important, but I feel like the ability to be stoic or almost the ability to be able to control your emotions, especially when you're selling, right? Indifference is important. What I discovered is that if you can tell yourself that it is safe, if you can stand and then you realize that actually all you're doing is walking down the side of a building and you know how to run, so you can run down the side of a building. For me, as soon as I got to that point where I could understand it actually became less scary. Like to me, skydiving, which I've done several times, much more terrifying now than rap jumping. But my first time rap jumping, the fear of actually you having to be, because it feels like you're letting go, and that does not seem natural by any means. And when you when you skydive and no one's holding, connected to you, right? They threw you off the plane when you start, right? Where you actually physically have to push yourself over.
Oh wow, both ramp jumping and skydiving sounds like wow.
Well, I prefer scuba diving, right? So scuba diving is nowhere near as scary. I love wreck diving, those sorts of things. Those are really engaging activities. You get to see wonders of the world that never exist. I mean,
did you dive? Did you do diving like not scuba, but with going like 20, 30 meters, etc.? You did the diving or?
Oh yeah, so I proper scuba diving with tanks and that sort of thing. So so I'm
okay, you do.
Yeah. So I actually have my deep dive license, wreck dive license.
Oh, nice.
So actually, Gibraltar is a really cool place to go. Gibraltar is obviously there was a lot of wars between Europe and England, and so there are so many battleships sunk off the coast of Gibraltar because it's like that tip that you go around as you're going around Spain. So there's so many ships sunk there. And if you're into wreck diving, it's great. If you're into, coral diving, which is beautiful, there's so many places, but wreck diving, I would suggest there.
I've tried deep diving a few years ago in Spain, Valencia, actually. And it's interesting how different the experience can be because I was going in the kind of getting the certification for the diver, and I was taught by this ex-NATO military guy, and he was very hard on. So basically, I did the 15 or 20 meter dive. My first or the second dive, I was just all in. And I remember that was the first time I experienced as if my body was put in a different environment that is not where the actual human body can survive, right?
Yeah.
And that's sort of like experience of that kind of loneliness and that something is wrong with you and then you need to figure it out. And then the panic of it was one of the weirdest feeling of uncontrollable panic that I've had in my life. And it's interesting how just generally human body works. I remember there was one time when I was scared a lot and I couldn't just go back, dive into, because whenever I'm going dive and I feel the same sort of like feeling of the pressure, I wanted just to say up, and then I wanted to go up all the time. And I remember the guy just took me in the hand and say, go here, take my hand, and then look down. And I remember I was holding his hand for 1 minute and sort of like feeling his warmth, and I come down and I sort of like, I had that, actually this is an environment that I can be kind of happy with, etc. Right? Just through human connection.
It takes time. I mean, there's that saying like, if you don't like yourself and you go away on holidays to feel better, you're still there, right? So, you're right. I mean, scuba diving is the same thing. Like, you're stuck with you. You can't talk to anyone else and those sorts of things. But yeah, I mean, it can be a little bit daunting. One of the things that I did when I was young is I used to swim underwater all the time, and I loved that. I had trouble equalizing my ears though when I went scuba diving. And that's scary. Like not scary, but it's painful. So, your ears can hurt and stuff like that. But I will tell you that a lot of times, because of my ear issue, I'll go through more oxygen. So I usually take a bigger tank than most people, and I'm still out of air. Right. Like, I just scuba dived in Grenada, and when, I went through my entire 15-liter tank, and we had to swap tanks underwater because, I went through too much air. But I mean, we knew it. I wasn't like not distracted. Like, we knew it. We planned it, just in case it was necessary.
Right. Oh, wow. Okay. One last question about traveling. Did you meet anyone who impacted your life during your travel?
So many people. I mean, that's really hard. I feel like if I was to think about certain people, there is a guy out of, actually he's from Ireland. We met in Argentina. He actually was one of the guys I went to see at Wazoo Falls, and I wasn't kidding. You agree to anything, right? He convinced me to run a marathon in the South Pole, and I'm like, yeah, absolutely, let's do that. Unfortunately, his father got ill right on returning. We never got to do it, so we actually are still in contact about possibly doing it in the future. But it was the way he held himself and the general demeanor that he had, and the influence that he had with people. That was always something, because there was no reason for anyone to take him seriously about what he was, or, to give him time, but he just believed that they all would, and they did. The other person was actually somebody that I not grew up with, but it was a friend that I made around probably 2021. And it was unbelievable. When he asked you a question, he genuinely listened, and he got excited, and he smiled, and he was just totally enthralled in what you were saying. And I remember thinking, this guy can make anybody feel like they're the most important person in his world. And I felt that was one of the most amazing skills I had ever witnessed. And for anyone that doesn't have that skill, gosh, it's one you should learn. Active listening, it's a learnable skill, it's coachable, it's something you can learn. And for sales especially, you need that, right? But that skill set, and unfortunately, I will tell you that maybe it was coming from an unhappiness place or whatnot, but he actually got addicted to drugs many years later, and he now is no longer interested in other people. And, but that skill set was something that I felt that wasn't coming from a place of I'm not worthy, but from a genuine care of who somebody is and a want to understand them. And I think especially for me, like, I sell to a niche, right? So I know exactly what their problems are. I know them better than they know themselves. So I can almost cold read their issues. And I think for a lot of salespeople, that if you don't have that, oh my gosh, go get that. If you're a business owner, same deal. But if you don't know somebody, if you don't understand, like, a lot of times somebody will say something and you'll disagree, or you'll start to say something, as opposed to just asking another question to truly understand. And I see this happen in sales. People ask another question because it's the next question in the process, or they ask another question because it's what they've been thinking about asking the whole way through, as opposed to truly listening and say, what question is meaningful for me to ask at this point?
You are the first one I'm asking this question to, because I did talk to a few very famous, very successful coaches, speakers, and best-selling authors who did 10, 15, 20, best-selling books. But I didn't ask anyone. And I have the feeling that while preparing for the interview, I had the feeling that you are the first one and the only one I can actually ask that I kind of trust you, that you can give me a fresh perspective on things. All right?
Well, firstly, that's a very kind thing to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So from the person who is in a sort of like offline business and being successful in that, and sort of like from the outsider, right, who stepped into the world of, award-winning coaches and authors and, best, most retweeted business coaches and sales bloggers and et cetera, right? Can you describe for me, how is it like, all the people, attention, pressure, what has changed in you? And just generally, how do you feel about the whole kind of environment that you're in right now? And, just generally. And was there any kind of transition in you just kind of being approached by all of that?
Yes and no. I remember when I got asked to speak at Microsoft Inspire, which was like 80,000 people. And like, don't get me wrong, I was fine with speaking to people. I developed that muscle, if you like. And, the first time I was like moving around, my hands were moving, but I figured out how to, do those activities well. But what happened was there were people at Microsoft Inspire, an auditorium, right? There were people behind you as well as in front of you. That took a little bit, but it was just me. It was me in my own head. I actually think we are our own best assets or our own worst enemies. And I will tell you that money changed me until I realized that people with money sometimes weren't nice. And then I changed back. The exposure that I've received, because and this is really important, I feel like if I didn't love what I did and I did it for the money or the exposure, then I would brag about the exposure and I would do it for the money. And I feel like it would have changed me, yes, because if you're centrally unhappy, then how could you not do that, right? You've got to be doing it for something. For me, I don't care. I mean, the only reason I care, and actually, so I'm wrong, I do care. But the reason I care is more awards get me on bigger stages that are significant to allow me to have a bigger impact for the mission that I'm on. And when you think about it that way, it changes everything. And actually, again, I'm going to go back to this point because it's an important one. It's the same thing when it comes to making money. For the life of me, I don't think about how I'm going to spend it or why it matters. I know why it matters, because the more money I earn, the more money I can spend on marketing to people that need to hear my mission, to need to see that they're not second-class citizens. It's the biggest impact, right? So for me, money and awards are all about making a more significant impact to help more people get what I love to see, get away from what I hate to see, and allow me to make the mission that I see as meaningful. Now, does that mean I don't pay myself well? No, of course I pay myself well. Because the truth is that if you don't have a wonderful life, you will stop having a meaningful career, because the truth is that people are like, oh, no. I ask them, do you want to save the world or do you want to make money? And they're like, well, I want to save the world. How long do you think you'll do that if you can't make any money? 6 weeks, 12 months, 4 years. Okay, well, I make money and I focus on making money to save the world. And that's allowed me to do this for a decade. And I think that's the really important thing. So I think if the awards are significant to, and don't get me wrong, when I won the first award, that's awesome, right? You finally got recognized, totally worth it. When you win your 7th, you don't really, if you've got ego about that, then that's because there's something underlying that's wrong. Or maybe you were like me when I was 22 and this is the first time that you've actually started making money and you want everybody to know it. So you're either going through a phase or you're doing something that didn't matter. And then you have to ask yourself, and this will really challenge everyone. If I was doing what I did now as my first business straight out, would I have still gone through that phase that I struggled to forgive myself for, where I was a person that I didn't like? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it was because I was miserable doing what I was doing. And I'm like, it's got to be for something. Let's impress people. As opposed to, my gosh, I would do this for free. It's unbelievable that people pay me to do it.
I think it's a good close up.
Well, good.
For the people to think of.
Well, this was a very engaging and entertaining interview. Thank you for asking different and unique questions.
Thank you so much, Matthew. I enjoyed researching about you. I enjoyed getting to know you better. I enjoy your philosophy, your mission, and I'll be so excited to see what comes next. And I wish you good luck. And I appreciate the time and appreciate the chat. I'm very inspired, and I had so much fun. Thank you so much.
It was my absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.